The overturning of Roe v. Wade and the removal of a constitutional right to abortion has seen the left go berserk, and the right attempt to point out that the decision simply returns the legislating of abortion laws to the states, to the US states, for the simple reason that the US Constitution does not confer and never did confer a right to abortion. The argument that the activist judges relied on back in the 70s was that because the Constitution guarantees the right to freedom, they decided, with nothing to back it up, that therefore freedom meant a woman has the right to choose to do whatever she wants with her own body. You may believe that is the case or you may not, but it was never a plausible legal argument, which is why everybody has known for years that once the activist judges were replaced with judges who followed the letter of the law, Roe v. Wade would be cactus. Again, it doesn't matter where you stand on the rights and wrongs of abortion, or more importantly, where you stand on the point at which a fetus becomes a viable human being, and therefore the point at which any moral society must say that only in the most extraordinary circumstances should we permit that viably living human being to be killed. The simple fact is that the US Constitution always said those decisions were the states themselves to make. Interestingly, one of those judges, the conservative Clarence Thomas, has also suggested that, although the Supreme Court does not intend to do so, and I stress that, he has suggested that feasibly you could apply the same logic to the same-sex marriage and some other issues. Clarence Thomas is a fascinating character because, unlike most judges these days, and certainly unlike the prevailing moral equivalence that we're all supposed to espouse in today's progressive world, Clarence Thomas has very fixed views on what is right and what is wrong. Here he is, way back in 2007.
You know, you can be in the middle of a hurricane, or you can be on a calm day. North is still north. You could be in a thunderstorm. North is still north. People can yell at you. North is still north. It doesn't change fundamental things. And in this business, right is still right, even if you stand by yourself. And I think you've got to be comfortable with that.
But the venom against Clarence Thomas has, of course, descended into personal abuse and demonisation, as is always the case, as the left goes insane following the overturning of Roe v. Wade. Here's that great intellect and moral crusader, Whoopi Goldberg, whose sense of moral equivalence is so generous and profound that she recently dismissed the Holocaust as being nothing to do with race, but just groups of white people killing other groups of white people.
Then let's be truthful about it, because the Holocaust isn't about race. No, it's not about race.
It is.
Well, no, it's
Jews
about
a different race.
But it's not about race. It's not about race.
What is it about?
Because it's about man's inhumanity to man. That's what it's about.
But it's about white supremacy. It's about
but
going
it's
after
not. It's
Jews
not about
ideal race.
But these are two white groups of people.
Groups of people killing each other. Anyway, Whoopi was back at it again, wandering blindly around that maze of poisonous brambles that is identity politics, trying to bring race, which didn't exist in the Holocaust apparently, into the issue of the Constitution and Roe v. Wade.
You better hope that they don't come for you, Clarence, and say you should not be married to your wife who happens to be white. Because they will move that. And you better hope that nobody says, you know, well, you're not in the Constitution, you're back to being a quarter of a person. Because that's not going to work either.
That's right, Whoopi, great stuff. Play the race card when it suits you. But as I mentioned earlier, the abortion debate for the majority of people comes down to how many weeks into a pregnancy does the baby really exist or stand a reasonable chance of surviving as a human. To the fundamentalists, life begins at conception. To the leftist, life doesn't begin until the moment the baby is born. Two academics have even argued for what they refer to as post-birth abortions. Figure that one out. So now, the new chant of the left is much clearer. A baby is not alive until it takes its first breath. Here's a charming young pro-abortion lass telling us so. Alas, the science is very clear that that is complete nonsense. But that leftist logic then leads you into the absurdity, the grotesque absurdity of this picture, which is a woman with her baby on her hip and its sibling clearly only a few days away from being born, and the mother has scrawled, "Not yet a human," on her pregnant belly. As I say, the grotesque logic of this scene is almost beyond describing. A baby on her hip, but the baby in her womb is not a human. What Clarence said is true. Right is right, no matter how much people howl into the wind, and equally wrong is wrong. But it gets worse. Drew Hernandez is one of those citizen journalists who likes to get a provocative response by going to demonstrations. He certainly got more than he bargained for when he attended a pro-abortion rally the other day outside the Supreme Court.
What's wrong, sir? You like killing babies? You love killing babies?
I love killing babies.
There you go. Speaking of crazy leftists, that bloke loves killing babies, or so he says so. That's where the debate ends up, but the left won't admit it. But speaking of crazy leftists, on a completely different topic, Sydney was again confronted by the climate cult this morning. The Daily Mail had a feature article on a woman they claim is one of the leaders of this group called Blockade Australia. Zelda Grimshaw is, according to the Daily Mail, an occasional firefighter, well, that's good, and a cabaret dancer, wow, who likes to quote Martin Luther King as a justification for the climate demonstrations. In her past, quote, her activism has involved opposing the Adani coal mine in Queensland, opposing cuts to arts funding, opposing military spending and weapons production, opposing forest logging, and opposing wealth inequality. There you go. Is she actually for anything? Yes. She supports Black Lives Matter, Indigenous rights and sovereignty. That means this isn't our land, it's Indigenous land. Human rights for natives in West Papua, great. Feminism, and for refugees to be settled in Australia. The article goes on. Miss Grimshaw's day job appears to have been as an artist, having performed cabaret dances, and as a comedian, as well as writing and performing a handful of songs. Can't wait to hear those. Okay, and she believes that ironing boards are downright diabolical, and she dreams of posing as a cyborg in order to infiltrate and disrupt an evil cabal of military-industrial psychopaths who are intent on destroying our planet. Shades of Lydia Thorpe there, infiltrating the evil colonial project. All of which we can have a good laugh over. But here's the thing. When you strip away all the nonsense, Zelda and her anti-ironing board climate crusade is no nuttier than any of these individuals, like Chris Bowen, or Matt Keane, or Adam Bandt, or David Littleproud, or David Pocock, Anthony Albanese, Penny Wong, the list goes on, whose salaries we pay and who all passionately believe, when it comes to climate change, pretty much the same tosh that cabaret singing, iron board hating Zelda believes, i.e., that climate change is such a dire threat to mankind that Australia must lead the world and transition urgently to renewables only. At least Zelda and her gang are only blockading the traffic for a few hours. And as inconvenient as that may be, it is nothing compared to the damage Chris Bowen and Matt Keane and so many others in positions of authority are doing as they deliberately blockade Australia's future prosperity and energy security by their mad push to close down our fossil fuel industries and embark on a terrifying world powered solely by renewables in order to reach net zero emissions. Blockade Australia? Yes, that's what net zero means. Speaking of which, this amused me. I mentioned the Glastonbury Music Festival yesterday, where all the climate lovies were in attendance to see Paul McCartney, St. Greta, and all the virtue-signalling rock elite. Here's how these people, who are so keen to take care of the planet, managed to take care of that tiny part of the planet called Glastonbury. Love your work, Greenies. Great stuff.